Hey guys, Dana here. Doing a video here of Jason Day, and this is actually not a driver lesson. This is actually longer iron. He's hitting a tee shot, and he has the length to do this quite a few times. So I think it's pretty good to know. There's quite a few juniors that have asked questions about how does he hit these things towering and then very accurate. Okay, so that's why we're gonna go over this. Now, it's kind of interesting. On a side note, this just one of the little facets that makes him successful is his ability to hit particular shots and create a mastery in doing that. And then also, he's done a huge amount of work in the mental preparation into his golf game over the last 4 years. He's worked a lot with Henry and Jason at Focus Band. He's kind of solidified the realm of being one of the top players in the world of golf. So, and to put that all into perspective, that's just another area, just like the long game that he has, and he's also, put the experience behind it and the short game. So it kind of developed a whole package. So there's nothing but really an upside with Jason's game. Now, obviously, we just saw that he had a slight injury, probably nothing very severe, but I will kind of identify my opinion, which quite frankly is, I don't even consider myself an expert on the situation, but I'm just going to throw mention at it. So, so this is kind of what he does. So we'll start with the address position. So you're going to see with Jason on the caddy view, or face on for that matter, that he's hitting an iron, and you notice the ball location, and I have a yellow dot on his left shoulder. Now, we want to think of the yellow dot as being the low point of the arc, okay? So you can see that the ball is very close to that. Not quite to the left shoulder, but probably 1-2 ball positions back. It's actually in front of the left ear at this point. He has a not an overly strong grip, so you see the left hand's turn probably 35 degrees, and you see the right wrist bend is very minimalized, and the shaft's almost vertical at this point. Okay, so for this club, let's just say this was a 4 or 5 iron, he's using maximum dynamic loft at the address position. Okay. He also has minimal right side bend and address, so from his belt line to his sternum, he hasn't tilted too far to the right, pretty centered. But what's interesting is, he hits it really high, and a lot of these same setup positions were the same as maybe, let's say, Jack Nicklaus. So if you look at Jack Nicklaus, he probably had his feet a little closer together. Toes might have been turned out a little bit more, but a lot of the same characteristics with hitting it high. Now, obviously, they had different curvatures. Jack faded the ball, and Jason hits a lot of draws. His miss tendency is an overdraw left, but nothing too severe. Okay, so if you're looking at this, this is a good way to hit a high iron. It's not going to curve very much because the ball is so close to the left shoulder, so it doesn't produce a lot of downward angle of attack, and this is per design. Okay, now on the down the line picture, you're going to see a pretty, they call it an athletic setup. It's just a proper setup. Okay, you see how the back looks pretty straight. There's a little rounding in the, the shoulder area. The neck's, soft. His tailbone's not pushed out. He's kind of sitting, and his weight's a little more mid foot to heels. Okay, he's not leaning over into his toes. You can also see it address his right elbow is underneath his left some amount. Okay, it's not too much, it's just about right. Okay, so when we're looking at this, this looks like somebody who's going to hit the ball really high. Okay, without really trying to overdo it. All right, so we're going to look at how he takes the club back. So we'll go back to caddy view, and you can see that when he moves, and right before this, he's going to have a little bit of a slight movement here. So watch, he just run through his waggle, and you're going to see this little move right there. as he starts to transfer into his right foot. Now, note that he doesn't move over. Okay, so when we say he transfers, he's moving his athletically, he's moving his center pressure towards his right foot. Okay, but he hasn't like slid over there. He hasn't shifted his hips over or anything like that. Okay, now I would say that probably the upper center moved a few inches to the right. I don't have 3D of him, but I would imagine it is. Okay. Generally speaking, most tour players shift to the right some amount. Okay. Now you're going to watch here, and this is that section 2, or we call it P2. Now you're going to see this is a good way of kind of measuring your swing if you're looking at this. From position 1, let's say the shoulders are pretty close to square, and when they turn back and the club starts to load up, you can see that it's one of those wider looking takeaways, so it doesn't have this early wrist set look. Okay, and then the butt end of the club, when it gets 90 degrees, is outside the right leg, 4 to 5 inches. Okay, so we can say that's a gradual setting of the wrist conditions, and it's a little bit wider also in the right arm. Okay, so the right elbow doesn't just fold to the side of the body. It's at just different rates. Okay, so at this point, what you're not really, what most people don't really take into consideration is how is he doing this? Well, not only is the club doing this in the arms, but the shoulders, appear to be. This is totally by appearance. It looks like the shoulders take it back. Okay, but it's really, a combination of that, the lead arm, the left wrist, and then the right elbow and how it's folding and the rate that it's folding. Okay, so this is a really important subject because a lot of amateurs do club head only, no shoulders, or club head only, no arms, and it's real important that we kind of sync this all together. Okay, I think especially for your higher handicaps, I think it's important to kind of understand how that moves, and then also how the weight kind of marries this all together. Okay, and you'll notice that a lot of the old videos of Gary Player and I think Gary Player had a huge influence on this because he wanted the body to be your engine, but we're so consumed as adults to override this with hands and arms. So this is a very good example of this being used. Okay, so you can see that the shoulders at this point are turned some amount. Okay, now we're going to go to the next section. I call it position 3, and this is where things go a little bit different for Jason, comparative to some of my students. But is it effective? Absolutely. Do I have a couple guys that do something similar? Yes. So you can see that at this point, you can kind of see his hips start to shift more. And what happens is his head's actually not going to the right. His head's actually staying in the same spot. So this is a form of extension. Okay, and because of this, his hand path goes more up. Okay, so as this is occurring, this extension, his pelvis moving to the right, his left knee coming in, and then he extends to the top. So he has this very, like I said, it's not quite Nicholas look, but it's very similar. Okay, now you'll see the hands shift up, 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 up. Okay, now you look at the structure of his shoulders before he does his start down. Okay, so he has nice left side bend, pretty good left bend in his hips. Now, this is where I think majority of us can't do this. Okay, and I think there'll be a few well-known teachers that might also agree with me on this. I think as nice as this looks, I think in the long term, he's going to have to for sure release the flex in his right leg a little bit more. And this is just my opinion on the matter, because what's occurring is he's going to lose mobility, as fit as he is, and he, for the lack of a better word, maybe even lift his left foot. Okay, that would be my recommendation, okay, in the long term, because what's happening is the only part that he can turn is the midsection of his body, or we call it thoracic spine. Okay, so if he's trying to keep the lumbar and the hips stable, and he doesn't want to blow that stuff out, he's got to release his pelvis back a little bit more. Okay, and the best way to do that is to do it through the legs. All right, and I'm not a physio or anything like that. I'm just a swing junkie, but that would be what I would look at. Okay, so I'm going to pull these lines away so we can go fresh here, and I'm going to put a line now on his left heel. Okay, so I'm going to go back to caddy view, and we can look at this and say, yeah, he has a very centered pivot. His head's still behind the golf ball. Okay, so I'll put 90-degree line there, right off his ear. There we go. So you can see his head's behind the golf ball. His hips are not hanging forward. Okay, so he doesn't have now if his hips were forward here, his head would be down and to the right, so he's not doing that. Okay, now this is a big one. This is the transition. Okay, so the transition is right here. When his weight starts to go forward, you're going to see that his left hip is turning. Now, it's not really his left hip, but that's where we measure it from. But his hips are turning, and his hips are staying inside his left heel. That's why I put the line there. So he didn't get his left hip outside his left heel. Okay? Now, that's a great position to be in, because from there, if I got my left hip too far forward, the only thing I can do is extend up. Okay, so for a lot of you golfers that have a tendency to stand up early in the downswing, generally that happens because you're steep. You're steep with a shaft plane, your wrist conditions aren't correct, or you get too narrow. You're going to have a tendency to slide further forward to reconcile that. Now, I don't want to get too complicated here. That's something that your teaching professional can help you with, but this is one of the aspects with Jason Day that I really, really like. Okay, and I'll bring him down on the line. Okay, now this is something that's a little different than a lot of my guys. Okay, so not that it's not right, it works just fine, but I'll show you how and why he can do this. Okay, so you can see that his shaft points outside the ball, which is awesome, but his left arm is actually pretty close to being parallel to his toes at this position. We call this position 5. Okay, now to do this is where you have to be really, really good. Okay, and he's actually going to widen as he's turning the angle between his left wrist and the club head. Okay, in order to do this. So he's rotating and he's widening. So this is the opposite of Sergio Garcia. Okay, now look what also he does. So while he's doing this, his left wrist right here is bowed, or we can call that palmar flexed. Right, and the shaft is parallel, just this is more close. We're missing a frame. We're going to say this is parallel, and the butt end of the club is here. So it's 2 degrees, give or take. Okay. Now also notice while he's doing this, his shoulders are slightly closed. Okay, and his left arm actually has flex in it, just a little bit. All right. Now at this point, his hips have moved slightly forward, but not a whole bunch. Okay, so we'll look at that again as he's doing this. Okay, so you can see that wrist condition, left arm condition. And then as he's coming into the golf ball, right, and this is about impact, his shoulders are slightly open, okay, but not very much. Okay, now this is like the part 2 of this, and this is his side bend. Now I'm going to keep this here, and I'm going to come back to this in a moment. But you can see, because that lever got really, really wide, and he's rotated open a lot, the wider the lever is coming down into the ball, the more he can start to side bend through it. Okay, so some guys will be more open, like a Dustin Johnson or a Rory McIlroy, but he had a different approach into the golf ball. Okay, and it was basically coming from a higher angle and wider. Okay, which is very, very Jack Nicklaus like. And to that point, I'm going to put a line on his tush. Look at that. See, he didn't really lose it. Now Jack did. Okay, but it wouldn't be uncommon for Jason necessarily to do that. Okay, BJ does it. I mean, there's quite a few players that actually do it, but they can orientate that shaft in the left wrist condition to the golf ball. Okay, now through that golf ball, we're going to go back to caddy. See, his head stays back, a lot of tremendous extension, right? And then the left, basically the left side of his body is catching his rotation. So right through here, he's rotated open and extending. So you can see he's extending, and he's maintaining that side bend as he's extending. Okay, so his belt's up, very Tiger Woods of old, right? Okay, so that's a lot of side bend. Okay, so you can see that right there. Okay, so Tiger did a lot of this too when he was at his prime. So you can see the right wrist fully released, left wrist released, it's an extension, the club's wide, and a lot of side bend, a lot of hip rotation. Okay, so a lot of high ball hitters go into this pattern. Okay, not all of them, but a lot of them. Okay, now I think the important thing is, okay, Dana, that's all fine and dandy, but what do we take from this as amateurs? Okay, without going through all the jargon. So what I notice, number one, when working with higher handicap players, is when they try to hit it high, they try to take this part of their body. Okay, and this is your in forward bend, but from the caddy view, this would be right side bend, and they set up with their head further and further back from that yellow line. Okay, now it feels like, yes, you can hit up on the golf ball more. Okay, and it's a major miscue when you're trying to hit up on a golf ball. You don't need to have your head back. Now the head is going to be behind the ball just a little bit because the ball's more forward. That would be more ideal. And the closer you get the ball towards the left shoulder, the less you're going to hit down on the golf ball. Okay. In fact, if I had the ball forward, based off this swing, I'd actually probably hit up on it. Okay, but in doing that, you're going to have problems with curvature. So for Jason, this is a pretty ideal way to hit a high draw. Okay, so that would be the first thing I do. I would try not to tilt to the right too much. Now, doesn't mean I want you tilted to the left, but 5 degrees is pretty much the ideal. Okay, and when doing this, you can monitor down the line if your right elbow is under your left slightly. So a lot of amateurs also have their shoulders too far open, and a lot of this stuff doesn't match up. Okay, and what's interesting, going back to the old players in history, a lot of them tried to exemplify the fact that some of these basics actually have a lot more meaning than the nuances. So it's really important to, I mean, we have these sticks that we can get at Lowe's and Home Depot for alignment, and sometimes just monitoring where we're aimed and how our shoulders, where our club face is pointing and whatnot, is really going to have a greater effect than my swing thought for the day. Okay, so these are just a couple things to think about. All right, now that's the first thing. Okay, now the other thing is actually a contrary to what Jason does. Okay, now Jason physically can do this, but what I would recommend, and I like his backswing, don't get me wrong, is for you amateur players that are looking at his swing. I mean, you're looking at a guy who is on the top level of golf. Okay, he is in the top level. He's also in really good shape. And as a professional, he professionally probably works out and conditions himself to be able to do what he does. But what I would recommend is, for most of you amateurs, I don't necessarily mind um, this amount of tilt into extension, but I would increase the range of motion that you have in your hips and your knees, because that's going to give you more depth. Okay, now when I say more depth, I mean the further the hands can go up and back. So up is a component, okay, that left arm being up, and the hands being back. So the further back and up I can get the hands behind the right shoulder, the more distance I create between the ball and my hands. Okay, and I think that's a really important thing for distance. Now, it's a question of how you do it. Well, allowing your knees to rotate, right leg to lose some flex, your right hip pocket to get further back is going to help you. Okay? Now notice when he's doing this, he's not just yanking his hands around his body, right? He still has some structure in his arms. And that's, a pretty big cue here from that second position that we addressed earlier. That structure has pretty much been maintained. Okay? Okay, now the other thing is when you look at him going through the golf ball, okay? Now, you're going to see as he comes through, his face goes into this free release look, okay? And I love that. I love that the face isn't turning over, it's not rolling, it's being released. So you can call that an angle hinge, for lack of a better term. But right here, we're seeing, and this is something, if your body can handle it, you're going to see that tilt and this tilt. Okay? So this is that side bend spectrum. Okay, so for somebody who hits a high draw, this is in there. Now if you're a slicer, this is pretty good. This would be great for you. Okay, so one of the things that a side bend does is this is not just coming over the top and wiping it. It's try to learn to hit golf balls, and I think the picture on the left is more important than the right at this point. I'll get to the picture on the right, but it's, back a few years ago, I don't want to date myself here, Nick Faldo had a very good video, and he would practice with a pillow in a door jamb right here. And he'd practice just turning his shoulders, keeping his head in the door jamb. Now in order to do that and still open, your hips would actually kind of look like this. See how his hips are kind of forward of his head. All right? And if his head came off the pillow, his hips would stay back too long. So this is a really great drill for those of you that are slicing it. If you want to learn how to hook it or draw it, keep your head on the wall and learn to open up. And then to piggyback that, which would be this right video, is try to keep your arms as extended away from you as possible. So the butt end of the club, you look right here, as he's coming through, is away from his waist. Quite a large distance. Okay, so that is part of the release pattern. All right, so those are some of the things that Jason Day does that I think will help you. So I'm not going to break down everything in his swing, but I think for most amateurs, I think the setup component is huge. I think getting the depth in the backswing is a huge part. Okay, and if you're a slicer, that third piece is also huge. So hopefully this makes sense. If you guys have any questions or responses, go ahead and post them on the YouTube page. I'll try to get back to them as soon as I can. And hopefully all of you guys have a great day and keep it in the fairway.